Welcome to our episode 1 of Parenting Porcupines. I'm Kasie Whitener, and we are broadcasting from our home studios on various locations today. This is the very first episode in our series. We're hoping to make a long time fixture here on YouTube. So thank you for being part of this. By all means, please like and subscribe. Read the show notes below this. You can go out to our blog, parentingporcupines.com, and read more about us. But right now I'm here with Jessica and with Melissa, and I'm going to give each of them a chance to introduce themselves. Real quick about me, I teach at the university, and I am a Socratic method teacher. So I tend to ask a lot of questions to get my students to be talking about what they're thinking about. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about today. So Jessica, you're on. Who are you? And give us a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I'm Jessica, and I live in the upstate of South Carolina. I'm a legal professional. I work in real estate, and I've got 2 kids. I have a son who is a preteen and a son in elementary school. And I think I often teach my employees when I'm training in the same way, by asking questions. And then even once they're trained, when they have questions about things, I often try to help them work through it themselves instead of just giving them an answer. And I parent that way as well. So it's interesting that you say that because it's similar. So
that's good stuff. And Melissa's here with us too. Melissa, you're in the Low Country. Tell us about yourself.
Country. We've lived here since 2011, and I'm never going back north ever again because there's too much snow. I've got 3 kids. My son is in 5th grade, and he does virtual online schooling. It's public school, but from home over the internet, which is very good for his concentration issues. And my 2 daughters are in kindergarten and 2nd grade, and they go to a magnet Montessori school. And we love the Montessori school because it's very self-led and they can look into what interests them.
That's good stuff. So we're all 3 members of the Libertarian Party here in South Carolina. I'm in the Columbia area here in the state capitol. And the reason we started thinking about doing this podcast was we think we come at parenting from a different approach than maybe some of our I wouldn't call them Republican and Democrat counterparts, but that's exactly what they are. So we thought we would sort of combine our political approach on the Libertarian Party side with our parenting approach, and maybe that combination would help shed some light or some insight on how to raise free individuals and free thinkers. So this very first episode is our first episode in a series called The School of Free Thought, and we've got multiple topics for this, but I thought we would start today, or actually Jessica, who did our outline, thought that we would start today with talking about how to teach your kids how to think instead of teaching them what to think. And this came up in our conversation on our way down to Florida, where I was like, man, you sound just like me. Like, I'm not interested in indoctrinating my daughter. She's 12. I'd much rather give her the tools that she needs to figure things out for herself. So Jessica, tell us a little bit about that. Help us get into this topic.
Yeah. So when I was growing up, my dad was very, we had a lot of very open conversations. We talked about a lot of things. We talked about current events. We talked about religion. We talked about the things that were going on in my life in school with my friends and things like that. And I grew up in a very conservative home, I would say Republican, Tea Party, Republican type ideology. And so a lot of our conversations were around that kind of line of thought, but my dad never really told me what he thought I should believe. He would always talk to me about things and explain things to me in a way so that I understood why he felt the way that he felt. And so it made me think about how I feel the way that I feel. And he's the one who told me it's my job as a parent to teach you how to think and not what to think. And so that's always really stuck with me in my parenting of my children, because when they grow up, I want to have conversations with them about their ideas and their political beliefs, their religious beliefs, whatever they are. And I want them to have a good space where they feel comfortable, but I also want them to be those free thinkers who analyze things and really think for themselves and have the tools to be able to do that. So
yeah, I think that's awesome. You were telling a story about your youngest son and his experience with the Tom Steyer commercials back during the Republican primary. It was the Democratic primary. Yeah. And Tom Steyer spent a lot of money in South Carolina trying to win that Democratic nomination, and it just did not work out for him. I remember my daughter coming downstairs and they were all complaining. All of her friends were complaining because the Tom Steyer commercials were all over all their YouTube channels. And they're all like, we can't vote. Why is he advertising to us? So, but your younger son had an issue with these commercials. What was it?
Yeah, so he actually, because kids are like little sponges, and so they soak these things up. And because there were so many Tom Steyer commercials, and the younger son doesn't particularly care for Donald Trump, so we were at ice cream one evening. We had gone to get ice cream, and we were talking about just different things, and the race and who all the candidates were. And he said to me, and my dad was with us, and he said, Mommy, I really like Tom Steyer. If I could vote, I would vote for Tom Steyer. And I stopped and I said, well, Caldwell, why? And he said, because I like what he says. He wants to make healthcare better, and he wants to help people. And I asked him, I said, well, Caldwell, how do you think those things are paid for? How is he going to get the money to do those things? Because they're going to cost money, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, how is he going to get all of the money to do these things? And he said, taxes. And I said, right.
I love it. He sighs when he says that, like,
And I said,
I'm walking into a trap and I know it.
Yeah. And I said, so Caldwell, what does that mean? And he said, well, Mommy, taxation is theft. So Tom Steyer is a thief.
Oh no. Well, so we're having this, it's so great that you said, so we're having this conversation on the way down to Florida. And I said, and I'm kind of laughing because taxation theft is like a slogan of the Libertarian Party, right? And so I have a t-shirt that says that too. And my daughter's the same way. Like that's the first thing out of her mouth when you ask her anything about government. She's gonna be like, well, taxation is theft. And that's kind of where we're at. Like anything after that is subject for debate. And so I think part of that teaching them how to think is asking them the questions to reason through it. Like it would be wonderful if the government had a magic wand and fairy dust and could grant us all the ability to fly and be healthy and young forever. But this is not Neverland, right? Like we don't live there. So, and Melissa was saying that she asks her kids a specific question all the time. It's got the same phrasing, so it sounds the same every time. Tell us what it's about.
So no matter what we're doing, I love Sister Wives. It's my favorite show. And I get so mad. And my kid, Mommy, what's the problem? I'm like, well, the government doesn't like the fact that he says he has 4 wives. And they look at me and I said, and is that any of the government's business? No, Mommy, that is not. So every topic, anytime anyone starts talking about the government, question 1, is it the government's business?
Right.
That's the base test for every question.
Yeah. And if we start there, right, then our kids start thinking about, okay, well, what is the government's business really? And that's where that limited government comes from. And so we're on the same page. I mean, I think this is going to sound like an echo chamber to our viewers who are watching this. I think in the initial, most of our viewers are probably going to be libertarians as well. They're going to be sort of like-minded. They're going to think the same thing. But for those of you who are watching, that this is not sort of the first couple questions you ask your kid, like, what is taxation? Taxation is theft. Like if that's not the refrain in your house, the question might be like, wow, you do sound like you're indoctrinating them. But our kids kind of grow up around listening to us talk about these sorts of things with our spouses, with our family members, with our neighbors. And a lot of times we ask those questions of our neighbors, right? So I'll ask the same questions in our happy hours that we have on Fridays on my driveway. I have my drink with me. I was thinking we should do this like a little sponsor every week. This is the Pensacola Bay Brewery glass today. I'm going to send them a little note and be like, I was drinking your beer for our very first episode. Sponsor. But anyway, so I think that because I asked these questions of our neighbors and of our friends, Holly's used to that question and asking too. And it's not always about politics. A lot of times it's about how does she feel? What was her experience at school today? Somebody said something to her and I'll say, how does that make you feel? Like it's very much a Socratic way of interacting with her. And so naturally those questions bleed over into the political side as well.
Yeah.
All right, when we think about vocabulary, right? So as we're trying to help with complex ideas, kids sometimes adopt whatever vocabulary they hear us using. And so how do we explain to them, to the children, right? I mean, it's a little bit harder for me. We have always spoken to Holly like she's a grown-up. Ever since she was a little kid, we've used all the words in our family. We say we use all the words. There's never been a time that I've said something to her that if she didn't understand the word, I then would give her the definition for the word. But I don't talk to Holly like she's a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old. It's always been the same vocabulary when I'm with her. So when we think about how to talk about some of these complex issues, Jessica, how do you explain something to your kid if you're and then how do you get your kid to use the right words back to you as well?
Yeah, and it's funny that you asked that because I was actually having a conversation with my older son right before we started this call, and he made a comment that I'm pretty sure he's heard, you know, somewhere else, but it was about all the stuff that's going on with Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. And so I was trying to explain the difference between those two things, and I was using words like disproportionately. And so what I would do is when I would use that word, I would ask, do you understand what that word means?
Right.
And so we would talk about what does that mean, you know, when something disproportionately affects one group over another. And so really just making sure that when I'm using those words that I'm making sure that my children understand what those mean. But we've also never spoken to our children like they're children either. I mean, we have always, when we have discussions with our kids, they're very open, they're very honest, they're very raw, and we use words. Slang is not allowed in our house. When Jackson comes home with his, you know, preteen slang, he's not allowed to talk to me that way.
Stop saying eat.
Yeah. Yeah, use the whole word. I need the whole word, kiddo. So but yeah, just making sure that when being cognizant of when I use terms that are bigger words, that making sure that they understand what those mean. So
yeah, the very first conversation I had with Holly, she came downstairs. She's sitting at the bar and I'm making her some dinner. She's eating a hot dog. And she says, Mom, I love hot dogs so much. I wish I was a hot dog. And then I would just eat myself. And I go, that is called cannibalism. And so then I start describing to her what cannibalism is. So the next day she goes into school and I don't know how it came out, but she is starting to explain to her teacher what cannibalism is. And I'm like, just waiting for it. I'm waiting for that parent teacher note to come home that goes, help me understand why your daughter is talking about cannibalism at the breakfast table of all places. You know, and I'm like, well, when we have an opportunity, right? Like we don't let it go. Like the minute that it comes up, like, let's talk about it right now. Let's not let that minute slide by. And even if I don't know exactly what I want to say there, that's partly where the Socratic method comes from, is like just asking them questions gives me time to think and gives me time to be thinking about how do I want to frame this? How do I want to explain this? So Melissa, you're with your kids all day, right? So you've got to figure out how do you, like, what's your stall tactic to get them to like focus on like, hey, shiny, while I try to think of what to say.
I try and my go-to is I'll give them correct information and accurate information, but I give them little tiny bits of information until they're satisfied. I'm like,
yeah,
okay, that's as far as we're going today. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's
asking questions.
I think that's exactly an effective. I think that's exactly an effective way to do it. You don't have to eat the entire elephant in every conversation. We don't always have to have these deep, intense conversations. It can just be these little bits and pieces that helps them to understand where you're coming from. Jessica, you said you and your dad talked to politics when you're growing up. Me and my dad did too, but we don't agree at all at this point.
Yeah, we don't either. We don't either now. he's still very right, and I'm very gold. So.
Do you think there's going to come a time, because I think this is the risk. I think this is why people teach their kids what to think instead of teaching them how to think, is there's a risk that they're not going to think what you do.
Yep.
And so imagine like your dad, my dad, Melissa, your family, like when they were teaching you as you were growing up, do you think there was a risk that you would grow up and think something different?
Maybe. My dad's been a libertarian his whole life. He just had no words for it.
Yeah.
Because I grew up hearing this, my family's really conservative. I live my life very conservatively. I don't care how anybody else lives their life. So, and that was always my dad's point of view. In this house, this is what we do. What they do, good for them. You be you. It doesn't affect us.
Yeah, is none of our business, right?
Yeah. So, and then I got my 20s, learned what libertarianism was. I'm like, Dad, I figured out what you are.
Yeah. Was he receptive to that? So I remember growing up, my dad used to call everybody communists. You remember during the Cold War, somebody would cut him off in traffic and my dad would be like, communist. I mean, like that. So I knew very clearly that communism was not the thing, right? But I also remember he had a subscription to the Washington Post, but I do think he voted primarily conservatively. But now the older he gets, the more conservative he is. And that's been challenging for me because he seems to be more conservative in the social side, which is where I'm much more liberal. I mean, LGBTQ rights, you love who you love. To your point, Melissa, like they do whatever they want. That doesn't affect us. That's okay. And there's this weird sort of moral, like a moral play in some politics right now. And I fear for some of our older citizens who have become hyper moral in their old age. All right, so Jessica, when we think of these libertarian ideas, right, the idea that we bring the Libertarian Party home, as you guys are working with your kids and helping your kids to be free thinkers, what kinds of things do you hope they'll take with them? And what kinds of things do you think you're willing to negotiate on?
You know, I mean, I'm willing to negotiate on pretty much anything because, I mean, even though my dad is very right, he sets a very good example because he and I, even now, we can have difficult conversations and we can disagree, but we still respect one another's opinions. And I think it's because he can have faith in knowing that whatever decision I come to, I haven't come to that decision just willy-nilly. You know,
Right.
I've likely read about it. I've really thought about it. And Kasie, you and I talked about this. I'm a person who I'm not good at making a snap judgment on something. I want to think about it. I want to mull it over. I want to think about how does it affect me? How do I feel about this? You know, what in my head to kind of work that out before I come to the place where I have an understanding and I have an opinion about it. And so my dad understands that and he appreciates that because he knows that whatever opinion I have, I've reached it with a lot of thought and very carefully, and it's a result of a lot of consideration. And so so really I don't think I'm anxious about how my children are going to grow up and who they're going to be. I hope that I can trust that I've taught them well and that, you know, whatever choices they make are the best choices for them. And yeah.
I think that rational dialogue, right? The ability to have a rational conversation about politics, things that people get a lot of emotion about, and people tend maybe sometimes to blow things out of proportion about, and to teach your kids how to have that rational, reasonable, coming from a place of love with your own approach, and then also knowing that I love this person I'm talking to and I don't want to intentionally hurt them or insult them in any way. I just want to help understand, you know, I want to understand them. I want to help them understand my side. Like that conversation capability is a tremendous lesson too. So Melissa, you said that as long as they can explain their reasons, you think that whatever opinion they hold is fine?
Yeah, as long as they've reached it through thinking it through and looking at the sides of the issue. If they come to a different conclusion than me, okay, I might argue with them, but I'll respect it
Yeah.
because you thought it through. It's not just a reaction.
I'm that way on just about everybody I talk to. So don't feed me your Fox News headlines. Like, bring me what you are bringing from having thought it out, and this is your own original thought. So in our next episode, we're going to talk about the pervasiveness of the duopoly and how our kids can be taught to recognize the battles that are worth fighting. And this, I think, is especially relevant right now as we're going into election season, and they're going to be given government education that is about the systems of government, using the election as an example of the systems of government. And it can in some ways skew their view of what the government is supposed to do versus what the government actually does. So our next episode is School of Free Thought Part 2, and we're going to take on the duopoly. Part 2, that's right. This is great. It went by so fast. Like, you can't even, it just goes like this, right? The show notes are out on the blog. It's parentingporcupines.com. Be sure to tune in to the next episode. Thanks for being with us. Thanks, Jessica. Thanks, Melissa. Wave. That's right. That's it. That's it for now. See you next time.
Bye, guys.